Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to Less Risk, More Growth, one of the webinar series of the Caribbean Center for Organizational Excellence. My name is DaC Blenman. I'm your facilitator for this webinar. I invite you to look me up on LinkedIn to get more details, but I have had over 30 years experience in the area of banking, finance, business analysis, and I'm happy to facilitate this session this morning. We have quite a packed agenda, and as a result, we are going to move along quite swiftly. This morning, we will spend some time as we examine this subject, less risk, more growth, looking at sources of organizational risk, weakening, and failure. We will swiftly then move on to stages of organizational risk, weakening, and failure. And then we're going to spend some time around the subject of organizational risk evaluation, prescriptive remedying, and a few other factors that will contribute to enabling your organization. We will have some time for open dialogue, and we invite your comments. You may want to also consider using our Q&A section to list any areas of concern you may have, to raise any questions, because we will look at this once we have enough time and try to answer as many of your questions as possible. That being said, the rules of engagement: feel free to question me on any related subject area. Challenge me, share your perspective, it's yours. As well, it's an opportunity for us to discuss and debate this subject area. And please do inspire me, share your personal experiences as part of our overall team building. So let's get into this as we look, first of all, at the sources of organizational risk. When we talk about risk, what are we talking about? And that's important to bear in mind as we actually travel along this journey. We are talking about the premature expulsion of a business from its place of purpose and survival due to mismanagement or misfortune, which can render it incapable of the capacity to effectively survive and realize its potential. In other words, it is existing in the market and it is pretty much excluded from the opportunity to continue to function in its place of purpose. One of the most telling experiences of this over the years during my consultancy across the Caribbean was an organization which was a leading entity, and one day it existed, the next day it did not, because the challenges confronted by that organization were such that its creditors just swooped in on it, took up all of the assets, the trucks, etc., and rendered that business incapable. So when we talk about premature expulsion, we are talking about untimely ejection. Something has broken down, something has gone wrong, and this should not be treated as normal in the course of business. I think we've become too comfortable with the idea that a business fails, and that's the best that we are going to try to address during this discussion this morning. We are talking about mismanagement, we're talking about misfortune, and we're talking about being incapacitated when a business fails. And these are among some of the concepts, the reasons why a business can fail. It has been poorly managed, there has been some form of misfortune, as in the case of disaster or calamity, or it has been incapacitated for some reason or the other. And permit me to say that for every instance of failure in a business, there is a cause, and believe you me, there's also an effect. We have taken note of so many businesses that have failed, and families have been significantly challenged because of the failure of those businesses. Again, this is something that has to be addressed, especially at the micro, small level. When a business fails, families are affected. Lives are significantly challenged. Children are unable to attend college or school in the way that they typically would. And this to my mind is a major cause for concern. So as we say, there is a source for every failure. There's a reason for every failure, and there is also a root to every failure. And the third element of this we will spend some time on as we progress this morning. The matter of consequences, as pointed out earlier, must not elude us, primarily from the socioeconomic fallout. And I say this against the backdrop that not only are families affected when organizations fail, the economy within which it operates also suffers. You see, the reality of this is that sound organizational structures are the bedrock of economic stability and socioeconomic development. And when the structural integrity of an organization is sound, levels of reliability and capability to retain existence and dignity in the long term is high. Every time a business fails, the economy takes something of a beating out of it, be it small, medium, or large. The effect is a bit more telling for large organizations when large organizations fail, but the fact is the economy is also impacted. So, I have come up with this model called the failure minimization model, which has sought to identify, analyze, and manage, failure, particularly as it relates to organizations in the Caribbean. And I believe that this holds true for most organizations. What we will look at very shortly are, the sources of some elements of failure. And these are wide-ranging. They are external and they are internal. Let's spend some time talking about the external sources of organizational weakening and failure. These can range, as most of us know, economics 101, from political, economic, social, technological, or environmental factors. Let's look at, these in a bit more detail. From a political perspective, failure can result due to changes in government policies. And we don't have time to get into all of the details on these. I'll just be sharing and giving the basic points on these. It can also be the result of tax and regulatory changes, foreign policies and labor laws. And we don't need to look too far to see examples of this, within the region. From an economic perspective, the issue of economic growth rate can have a telling effect upon individual businesses and upon individual sectors. And again, we wouldn't get into this in detail, but sufficient, to bring to knowledge the examples. Inflation, is quite basic. The rate of employment, less people employed, less opportunity for spending, less opportunity for businesses to share the purse of households. Exchange rates, the sovereign rating. And just let me spend a bit of time on the sovereign rating. When the rating of a country falls, so too does the rating for commercial entities. In effect, if the rating of one of our countries across the Caribbean goes down, and as a result, the level of anxiety for creditors go up, interest rates go up, not only for the particular jurisdiction, but they also trend upward for commercial entities that are seeking, credit. And that is important to note as well. From a social perspective, demographics play a vital role in terms of organizational weakening and failure. And we just probably need to look at the tech age and what has happened and the new wave that has arisen across business sectors globally, where most business is now being done in a digital way, and that's being driven by young people. Cultural changes and lifestyles, the level of development of a nation's human capital, educational levels, these are all sources of external organizational weakening and failure. And I made mention a few moments ago with respect to the technological factors. And an organization that does not align with new technologies, becomes a dinosaur, and in effect, it will, suffer some measure of challenge, weakening, and compromise, because the world is now a very technological world, and the place of business is now very much technologically driven. A business without a web presence, really is in danger of losing opportunity to secure great opportunities for development. And then there are the environmental factors, and case in mention here are natural disasters, environmental agendas, laws, and lobby. And we have seen in recent times how, consumer groups have lobbied against organizations because they have not been environmentally friendly and have rendered them weak, and sales have plummeted because of such lobbies. So these capture in essence some of the external sources of organizational weakening and failure. Why are we talking about these? The reason is research shows that a significant percentage of businesses do not, as a part of their ongoing assessment and monthly reporting, pay enough attention to the contextual factors that are likely to impact them or that are having a telling effect upon them. They just don't. And it is only when these factors begin to have some measured impact upon them that they respond. And this, to my mind, is part of the challenge and the reason behind this, whole notion of less risk. And, if a business can be inoculated against external or contextual forces that can weaken it, then it should. It should. And I think we all well know how at age 1, 2, we got those vaccinations for the purpose of protecting us against measles and other childhood diseases that can or situations that could have rendered us weaker as we grew older. And the context, this is being spoken of in the same context. Now, we're going to come back to this particular development continuum in a minute, but sufficient to say that not only are there external sources that must be attended to address the issue of an organization avoiding early failure, there are also internal issues. As I said, we'll come back to that. Now, statistics suggest that 46% of business failures are due to incompetency, poor management. Poor management. Management is employed to manage, and very often they don't. 30% is due to managerial inexperience, where persons are in positions but just do not understand how to manage and how to address important strategic and developmental matters within the organization. And then 11%, the statistics suggest, has to do with industry experience. Now, the examples that we have before us speak to strategic, operational, and financial internal sources of organizational weakening. Let's have a quick look at a few of them, not all of them. From the strategic perspective, the question that I would wish to pose is there an element of strategic myopia or a lack of foresight in the organization that you work with, that you manage, that you own? Because if there is, that is a significant contributor to organizational weakening, compromise, and failure. I beg the question as well, is there a lack of innovation? Are there new products, new methods, new approaches being considered and implemented? If not, then your organization stands the risk of being left behind and carrying a higher cost to operating and competing in the market. What about from an operational perspective? Are the products produced by your entity of a standard that they can be, exported to other markets? Do they meet global specifications for export? What about, the quality of the workforce employed to produce these items? Is it that they care about what's happening and relate to the bigger picture so that the levels of productivity is at a level that can result in quality production? You see, a dissatisfied workforce can be a major hindrance to opportunities development, but more telling, can contribute to a significant weakening of an organization. And I don't think we need to spend, too much time trying to find examples of that. They're all around us. Another important one is that of managing the resources that are available. One of the challenges that organizations across the region have is the limited resource capability compared to other nations and to, other large conglomerates. But the question is not as much the level of resources available as it is the optimization of resources available. Where there's an investment in resource for the purpose of productivity, and there's not the realization of the return commensurate with that investment, that organization is also in danger of failing. And then the all-important ones that have been beaten to death over the years, the issue of cash flow and inability to secure finance. Those have been among the great concerns of many businesses for an excessive period of time. But permit me to say that when other factors are working well, the issue of cash flow can be easily corrected. And when other aspects of organization are properly aligned, the issue of ability to establish a competitive advantage and be a definitive player in the market is quickly addressed. That being said, we are right back here at the development continent. I wish to suggest that an organization passes through varying stages on its way to maturity. And by definition, an infant organization is one that has been in existence for approximately 1 to 5 years. For the purpose of our discussion as well, we would treat an emerging organization as one that is between 6 and 10 years, a maturing organization as one between 10 and 25 years, and a mature organization as one that is over 25 years. The at-risk exposure at infancy is higher. It's much higher. It is extreme in accordance with our development continent. At the emergence level, it is high. It's not as extreme as in the infancy stage, it is high. And at that stage, the organization is attempting to address a series of issues, but it is still exposed. And as it moves on to maturity, the at-risk exposure moves from high to moderate to low. Let's look at some of the factors that are characteristic of an organization during that period of infancy. At that stage, the organization is pretty much fighting to survive, and the level of exposure is high. The likelihood is that organizations at this particular stage are trying to address matters as it relates to their strategic outlook. They may not be characterized by formal systems. There's an absence of a quality management framework. they're trying to put a definition to the customers and to build relationships so that they have repeat business. The product is undergoing some change, and they're trying to pretty much understand market preferences and how the market is responding to the product. And as a result, changes are taking place in that product to make it more market ready. As well, this is a stage where the company is trying to give definition to the market that can have a percentage of and can rely on to support its cash flows, and as a result, its capacity to have longevity in the market. The issue of capital adequacy is high, and it's a major concern at this level of the organization. So too are cash flows and the ability to realize a significant profit margin. It's because of these issues at the infancy stage that the organization is significantly exposed and the risk is extreme. Now, if indeed those are the issues that are impacting an organization at its infancy stage, they, to my mind, should be the areas to which significant attention should be paid during that particular phase of the organization. I'm therefore suggesting that during the infancy stage of an organization, that these particular matters are important for addressed by those who have the oversight of the organization, or for that matter, if it's us, an entrepreneur who is jack of all trades and master of none, or master of some, I should say. It's important at this stage to ensure that the required technical support to give the organization opportunity to live longer is employed somehow or the other. That, to my mind, is very critical. During the emergent stage, the likelihood is that the organization has been able to give some definition to its customers as well as to its products. So these are not as telling and demanding in terms of management time. And the remaining factors here in need of consideration include, ongoing strategic outlook for the organization, formalizing the systems that drive it, its quality management framework, continuing to give definition to the market, as well as those, ongoing financial factors, specifically here, the adequacy of capital, cash flows, and the level of profits. At the maturing stage, you would note that the organization has now addressed, who it is. It is strategically sound. There are formal systems in place. There are customers who they can rely on, and there's a product that has been able to give definition to why they exist in the market. So attention at this stage is now pretty much on quality management, market definition. This one continues to be critically important, and you would note here again the all-important capital adequacy, cash flow, and profit margin factors. In the final stage, the maturing stage on the continent, most entities have at this juncture been able to give very strong definition to its ability, its capital adequacy, and ability to invest in other areas, to diversify its operation, and to create more refined space for itself in the market. And the likelihood is that the reserves for organizations like these are pretty high. But of course, there's still the need to continue to manage the cash flows, focus on quality management, without which the organization is likely to encounter major problems down the road. Continue to keep that connect with the market, both from a social as well as a demand supply perspective, and or ever important, ensuring that profit margins are commensurate with the level of investment, be it, investment for new products, investment for new plant, or whatever the case may be. You need to ensure that the profit margins continue to be adequate. This is what shareholders are looking for. Certainly at this mature stage, these are entities that have got some measure of market, dominance. Now, it's important to note that not only from an internal perspective are these factors, the factors we just went through, important, but it's important to understand what is happening at departmental levels. We have seen over the years departments that have destroyed organizations because, a turf has been established and spanners are put into the work, and issues arise, and one department or an individual in a department can hold up an entire organization or render it quite weak, especially if they're the ones who have full knowledge on a particular area of the organization. And that this is something that is important to know. The issue of people failure also must be taken into consideration. If particular persons exit the organization or die, what will it do to the organization? And then process failure, how effective are the processes? We were working with a company, again in the region, that produced windows, and they had invested quite a bit of capital into the actual supply of the raw material to produce these windows. And one of the challenges this company faced was that of literally not having the screws that were required to put the handles on to those windows so that they can be owned. So after passing through the entire production line and coming to the final stage where the actual handles needed to be installed, they could not install them. As a result, that company had a large percentage of its stock that just was stuck in the warehouse, and because the screws had to be imported from as far as China, it created significant cash flows for that company. Well, the long and short is that it failed eventually. So, this issue of process failure is very important. The issue of people failure is also critically much important, and particularly as we speak to the quality of output, the level of output, the ethical behavior of individuals, and the error that human beings can bring to service or to the production line of critical importance. Having addressed these matters, I want us to now look at the stages of organizational risk, weakening, and failure. We've spent some time talking about the sources of organizational risk, and we have looked at the external factors that can impact an organization. We've not dealt with them in detail. We have also spent some time looking at the internal factors that can impact an organization and weaken it. And I wish to indulge our attention looking at the stages of organizational risk, weakening, and failure. Believe you me, organizations get infected. And very often, the infection is not seen. And that's stage one in our own analysis of the experience that organizations tend to have that can lead to possible expiry, to failure, to removal from the marketplace. During stage one infection, as I pointed a bit earlier, there are things that are being planted in the organization that can be damaging to it. It could be as simple as poor relationship between a supervisor and a subordinate and the management style, and that individual goes away from the organization each day and they don't speak well of the organization, or during the time that there are are employed during that 8 to 4 period, the level of production is lower because the emotional risk has increased in the organization because of the strain of relation between a supervisor and a subordinate. These things may appear insignificant, but very often that employee has a friend who has a friend who has a friend that will convey inside the organization, their displeasure with the relationship between themselves and the supervisor, and solidarity begins to build against that supervisor or against that manager, and the strain then moves from that individual employee to a group of employees. And this may not be seen initially, but productivity is going down, mistakes are being made, the company is infected. And that's just one of a million examples of the seeding and rooting during the infection period that can lead to the weakening of an organization or increased opportunity for risk. Compromise would have taken place, but it would not have been apparent. It is extremely critical for organizations to understand this stage of seeding and rooting and be able to measure and take corrective action at the infection stage. And this applies, within the context of the body. This applies as well. If I discover a little bruise on my hand and I don't treat it, it can result in germination and propagation, which is stage 2, where this situation, whatever it is in the organization, can then begin to have a contagious, impact upon the organization. And I made mention to it a bit earlier, where that employee would say to, their fellow employees, that they're not so happy anymore working because this and because that, and we use a term here in the Caribbean, taking on fire rage. Someone begins to take on the other person's fire rage, and this thing is beginning to sprout from out of the ground and show its ugly head in the organization. And where is it showing its head? In terms of the quality of production and in terms of the service that is delivered by these individuals to persons who are interacting with the organization. And, a major challenge for a lot of our organizations is that when these things begin to manifest, they're not dealt with in the way that they should be dealt with. And as a result, the treatment of them as insignificant often result in stage 3, in capacitation. At stage 3, that organization aspect of it probably has been undermined, and the organization is probably now approaching a stage where it would be helpless, or is indeed helpless, or significantly weakened because customers have taken to social media and have started to give particular comments about the organization. They have raised the concerns regarding the poor service that they experience, and some people have been bold enough to name the organization, and a range of other examples can be brought to the table that are evidence of incapacitation in motion. Some organizations are able to survive the stage of debilitation, others don't. Once weakened, they are pretty much on their deathbed. And we have some very classic examples of large organizations that have experienced this type of debilitation, and not only debilitation, but were brought squarely to face death's door. What are among the important lessons that we need to draw from this here? It is that the management of an organization is important to the effective running and development of an organization. And particularly within our recent history, there has been increased emergence of news articles and stories of bad practices, wrongdoings, and lack of foresight by CEOs and political officials and their associates and leaders of organizations. And more concerning has been the roll-on effect and significant impact of their actions on wider communities, which have endangered the confidence of communities and investors, and yes, business sector. Even more alarming has been the rate at which the ethical principles of business and communities has degenerated to greed and dishonesty and elusiveness and sheer downright unprincipled behavior, which some would have us believe is the way business is done. A guise that promotes and trades good corporate and business citizenship for bad practices built on selfishness and brutality. I wish to categorically state that these hostile and uncultured practices are not good for business, nor should they be mistaken as a modern-day style of competitive leadership, and for that matter, adopted as a pattern for successfully progressing an organization. In the well-publicized 2008 global crisis, very evident was a level of apathy fueled by greed and progress at the expense of an unassuming public. And one does not have to look too far in the past to see the level of damage occasioned by such practices. What is very sad in all of this is that the culture of greed and selfishness has seemingly become an epidemic that seeks to justify itself in a language and code of practice in the business community that has only led to increased challenges, not only in the region, but in the world, and incidences of poverty and vulnerable countries. These issues require ongoing management, and they require ongoing management by management. If not attended to, the red arrow points to exactly what takes place. The morbidity factor is very, very high at the infancy level, where the company is infected, it's contaminated, it's debilitated, and it dies. And this is part of the reason why companies die during the first 5 years. Those external and especially the internal factors that are swept under the carpet. Given that in the emergent stage, more attention is being paid, and as a result, some issues of infection, while they may slip by, and contamination and debilitation, it does not necessarily lead to the death of the organization. But that is because attention has been paid to these factors. And more mature organizations, because they have now got policy frameworks, procedural guidelines, disciplinary processes, appraisal processes, a whole range of other things are in place. They are able to contain, infection and the contamination, and don't see some aspects of debilitation. But more than ever, when you look at the research, organizations that have died during the 10 to 25 or over 25 stage, the maturing or mature stage, has been due to poor governance. mismanagement of resources, poor leadership. So I would want for us now then to talk about this from the perspective of how we can address some of these issues. And these are the 7 parameters I wish to put on the table in the final segment of this conversation for consideration by entities to address some of the risk issues. I wish to suggest that an organization should be the subject of a business scan at least once annually. If there are major issues taking place in that organization, engage in quarterly scanning of the organization. And there are a whole range of risk factors that can be considered in that respect. We have developed these in one of our courses that is available, which looks at diagnosing strategic risk factors in organizations, where over 150 indicators have been made available through that online course that allows individuals to not only look at the factors and learn from them, but to also assess the organization, come up with a score, and determine whether or not there are risk gaps in the organization. Doing the periodic business scan is critically important. And in doing so, it is important to state the problem in terms of source and severity. The sources can be financial, operational, economic, or it could be strategic myopia. These are some of the things that we raised earlier. It could be any of these. The important thing is to be able to identify it, determine the severity of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about the cost of it in a few moments. Very important. Once the source has been identified, find also the root of the problem. Very often, what is seen is above the surface, and the top of the problem is pretty much removed, but the root of it is still there, and it manifests itself. It will continue to manifest itself, and very often manifest itself in a more powerful way. So it's important that not only the issues when a business scan takes place are identified in terms of severity and source, but go to the root. Go to the root. The usual approach in organizations is to identify a problem, do some firefighting, to try to bring it into a particular perspective. They are able to solve an aspect of it, but not all of it, and it pushes its head up again. If the roof is leaking and the rain is falling, it is okay to put a bucket to catch the water. When the rain is finished, the problem has not been solved. It's important to go to the roof, patch the roof. That way you don't have to address the issue again. And that's the preferred approach. Go to the root of the problem. Root cause analysis is a business-long strategy for eradicating major issues within organizations. Thirdly, define the symptomatic relations. Remember we spoke earlier about that staff member who, because of the bad relationship between themselves and the supervisor, would have gone on and spoken to someone else, and the thing, began to have more telling effects. It's important to understand and define any particular relations that may be symptomatic to the problems that may exist in the organization once that scan has been done. And it may mean doing some organizational transformation to, address issues of management style and, look at, the new workforce and how it responds to this and to responds to that. A whole host of things which we don't have time to get into, but I believe that, you are picking up the particular direction we are going in right? Doing this, reduces the risk and certainly positions the organization to be in a much stronger position. Evaluate the severity of the failure. We spoke about this a little earlier, and this particular table highlights, the various stages of risk and the consequences that can be attached to it. And certainly, if it is, at the very significant level where there's almost a 90% certainty that it will have a very telling effect upon the organization, then that cannot be left alone. It just cannot be left alone. Once the severity has been identified, it's important to also determine the costs for taking corrective action. And this is where this is where a lot of organizations they know there's a problem, and as a result, they don't pay attention because there's a cost attached to correcting the situation in the organization. Determine and prioritize the corrective costs and schedule it for correction. If it is not dealt with, it will just materialize into something that is of major significance. Evaluate the failure priority, and in that respect, if it cannot be dealt with, determine at what stage it can be dealt with, and look at possibilities for at least controlling the situation within the organization. And certainly, number 6, attend to and treat the root immediately. Attend to and treat the root immediately. Attend to and treat the root immediately. Organizations fail because attention is not paid to treating the root and to treating it once resources and opportunities available to addressing the matter. If it is that the company requires major surgery it is. Thereafter, it's important to fortify the organization by investing in some form of system to ensure there's ongoing assessment of what is going on in the organization. I think that the challenge does not exist as much in large organizations as in small organizations. Small organizations, they don't have any systems for reporting, no exception reports, no understanding of what has taken place financially in the organization because records are not being kept. And if we were to look at the various internal factors that weaken and create risk and compromise of the organization, we may be able to also use that. Well, not maybe, I am suggesting that can be used as the basis upon which to pay attention to put the necessary fortifiers in place. Importantly, I wish to encourage organizations to address measures of strategic risk, operational risk, stakeholder risk, and financial prudence. I think if these areas are identified for ongoing scan within the organization, that it is not likely that matters can arise in the organization without someone being aware of them and being able to pay attention to addressing them in a timely manner. This brings us to the end of this aspect of the conversation, and I am happy to take any comments, questions that anyone may have in respect of our discussion this morning. Less risk, more growth, 7 steps for extending the life of your business. Feel free to drop those questions into the question board area. We are going to look to open up the microphones in a moment or so that if you want to give voice